In news which should surprise absolutely none of you, billionaire oligarch Michael Bloomberg is plotting a brokered convention strategy in order to steal the nomination away from Bernie Sanders should he come away with the plurality of delegates but not have that 50% threshold. And the reason why this is super relevant right now is because if you look here at the 538 forecaster, it is predicting that it is more likely that no one would win the nomination than that Bernie Sanders would win the nomination on the first ballot. You can see here 34% for Bernie Sanders that he would win the nomination on the first ballot versus 42% in terms of that no one would win the nomination. And Joe Biden being all the way down here at 12% and then Michael Bloomberg at 10%. It is most likely that Bernie Sanders would come away with the nomination, or come into the convention with the most delegates, but then he, very well may not have that reach that 50% threshold, which, by the way, isn't particularly uncommon. The last person to do it straight away was John Kerry. Now, other people were able to win on the first ballot, but that's because those other candidates gave their delegates to that candidate, which is possible, but doesn't seem particularly likely. At that Nevada debate, one of the things you'll notice is that every single candidate except for Bernie Sanders said that they would be willing, or at least interested in, seeing superdelegates flip and subvert the will of the people, suggesting, of course, that they don't think that they're going to come into the convention with the most delegates, but also suggesting that they may be interested in having that happen to them. So they may not be willing to give their delegates to Bernie Sanders. They might think, well, hold on, let's see what the superdelegates do. Let's see what happens. And so, it's a complete nightmare scenario. Both sort of the left wing of the party and the more moderates are admitting that, look, if this happens, it will be a disaster for the party. And, we very well may not be able to recover from this. So let me read a little bit of this article for you here. You can see here, the effort largely executed by Bloomberg senior state-level advisors in recent weeks attempts to prime Bloomberg for a second ballot contest at the Democratic National Convention in July, poaching it away from more moderate people like Joe Biden. And the outreach has been by phone call, blah, blah, blah. With Sanders' emergence as the front runner in the presidential primary, Democrats in those states have recently raised the prospect that a Democratic socialist could be a top-of-ticket liability. Now, here's the thing about this. I don't think that's what they're actually worried about. Now, you can say, oh, well, they are worried about electability, and maybe to some extent they are, but Michael Bloomberg, you think Michael Bloomberg is more electable than Bernie Sanders? With his NDAs, you could say there are some centrists who make the argument that Joe Biden is more electable. Okay, whatever. We have evidence that we've talked on this channel how that isn't necessarily the case. But Michael Bloomberg with the NDAs, come on. Here's what I think this is really about. This is about whether or not these establishment people think that they're going to be relevant in a Sanders administration. That's what I really think that this is about. Because in a Sanders administration, you're going to have to know different people in order to be relevant. If you want to get invited on the talk shows, if you want to be, respected at the DC parties, you need to know other kinds of people. You need to know the activists. You need to know the people who are on the ground. It's not just going to be about knowing the people at the think tank, knowing those sort of top-rate people. And that's why, Bernie Sanders is such an existential threat to the Democratic Party. It's not just his policies, which is also going to be, is also in that sense an existential threat to the moneyed interest in the Democratic Party. It's also just about everyday Democratic elites, wanting to remain relevant. And by the way, this is actually why having more kind of establishment but still left-wing people in terms of the brokered convention is actually going to be really, really important for Bernie Sanders, such as, I made a video talking about Bill de Blasio's endorsement of Bernie Sanders, and I talked about how that was really relevant in terms of the brokered convention, because these other sort of establishment people will see Bill de Blasio's endorsement and know, hey, I don't really want to tick off Bill de Blasio because he might give me a job later, et cetera, et cetera. And with Bill de Blasio having sort of his now interest staked in a Sanders administration because he gave the endorsement, his interests are now tied up in Bernie Sanders winning the nomination, means that Bill de Blasio has an interest in seeing Bernie Sanders win. So he's going to go out and, talk to these other establishment people and hopefully try to persuade them. And that's, by the way, what the Sanders administration really, or excuse me, not the Sanders, hopefully Sanders administration, what the Sanders campaign needs to be doing right now. They need to be talking to these other delegates, talking to these people at the convention and, trying to persuade them that, that Bernie Sanders is electable. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean changing on policy. That doesn't mean changing positions. Don't get it twisted. I'm not saying that at all. That would be a huge mistake on multiple levels. But they do need to be talking to these people and, saying, hey, look, yeah, things are going to change under my administration, but I do think that, we're electable. We're going to beat Donald Trump. And, if you want to see Democrats in power, this is how you do it. And Michael Bloomberg is not electable. So if you think you're going to be relevant under a Bloomberg administration, you're wrong about that too. Now, there's essentially two arguments which we're really hearing right now. And I talked a little bit about this in one of my more recent videos, but there's essentially two arguments that we're hearing right now in terms of why it's okay to have superdelegates. The first thing they're saying is, oh, well, look, Bernie Sanders was involved in writing the rules for the last convention, and so why is Bernie Sanders now criticizing the rules about superdelegates? That's clearly a hacky argument, because what Bernie Sanders was involved in was getting rid of superdelegates on the first ballot. That doesn't mean that he likes them on the second ballot, but that was the compromise that they were able to reach. And the second hacky argument that we're getting is, well, look, we wouldn't want a candidate to come away with only 25 or 30% of the vote and then, get the nomination when all these other candidates are sort of splitting the vote. That doesn't give a holistic account of the electorate. And the argument against that is, well, that doesn't mean that superdelegates are the best way to give a holistic account of the electorate. Superdelegates are part of a single kind of upper crust level of society. You think that those people are going to be able to give a holistic account of what the overall Democratic electorate wants? The better thing to do, right, the response then is to say, well, the better thing to do rather than have superdelegates is to just implement ranked choice voting. That's how you find out what the voters really want on multiple levels, as opposed to using undemocratic superdelegates. So don't get it twisted. Don't buy into any of their hacky arguments that they're going to try to use to tell you that, oh, we should allow superdelegates and allow to subvert the will of the people. Don't get it twisted. None of that's okay. So, but anyway, if you like the video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.